If they'd seen a huge list of questions, they would have had no resilience to be able to do that at all.
Yeah.
Because it's drip fed through it, and a bit of enjoyment and a bit of laugh at Judy. She's just gone down a snake. And I've got lots of different boards.
You're the fall guy.
Yeah. And I'm like, wah, 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 as I'm going down a snake, and they laugh, and we're all fine.
It's all about this professional conversation that we're generating together and the supportiveness. Yes. And we all know that as much as it's lovely for us, it's our students that are benefiting.
The research is if they are taught in the right way from the beginning, it never becomes a problem. The best mathematician in the school best maths teacher in the school should not be put in year 6. They should be in early years.
Welcome to the Qualified Tutor Podcast. I'm your host, Ludo Miller, and I'll be interviewing tutors and thought leaders from across the tutoring landscape to inspire, inform, and motivate you to become the best tutor you can be. The Qualified Tutor community is a safe and supportive space for tutors who love to learn and grow. We offer training, resources, ideas, and a chance to connect with like-minded tutors. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes. This week, we're joined by Judy Brice, an expert in dyscalculia, which many have described as dyslexia for maths. Judy takes us through her methods for working with children who suffer from maths anxiety, a very real and problematic issue in the tutoring industry as well as in teaching in general. There is so much to learn from Judy's experience, and we are so lucky to be joined by so many experts in SEND in the Qualified Tutor community. Judy recently joined us, and we are delighted to have her with us. Today's conversation is a real exploration of this area, and one that does not get as much airtime as other areas of tutoring. Listen in as Julia and Judy discuss their stories and their experiences of working with children with dyscalculia and other learning difficulties, as well as the pedagogical research into the area and how this can be used to inform our tutoring. We know this will be an enlightening conversation for all.
Judy, tell us about a holistic approach to the teaching of maths.
Well, that's how I try and teach. I try not to be teaching for a test. I don't like teaching to tests. I like to teach for understanding, for the children to really start to enjoy what they're doing. And most of the children that I teach come to me because they've got really, really bad maths anxiety. An awful lot of them have had a previous tutor, and it hasn't worked either very quickly or, over a couple of months. And then the child has gone, I don't want another tutor. That didn't work. And then they've reached this awful point where they're feeling so bad about maths that they just can't function. And then their parents have been really worried. And then they've found me, and I've tried to teach them in a way that brings down their anxiety. So it's a lot to do with sort of getting them so that at the moment they're in that sort of really bad anxiety zone where they can't function. Their working memory isn't working. The processing speed has just gone right down, and they just can't function. So it's all about trying to get it so that we can bring down the anxiety enough for them to be able to then function. So I can then teach them.
So you're talking about the connection between the mental health and the readiness for learning.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And if they are not, if they're too scared, and if they're still in that fight or flight mode, it doesn't matter what brilliant lesson you chuck at them, it's not going to go in and it's not going to help. So when I first start tutoring a child, we play all sorts of games, and I'm really into gamification of my lessons.
Yeah.
I teach on Zoom, and I use bit paper, which I think is brilliant. It's really set up as an interactive whiteboard, especially for tutors. And that enables me to be able to preload anything I want from the whole of my hard disk or the whole of the internet of resources I can bring, and I can paste them all into the bit paper, and I have it all loaded up on lots of pages.
So those will be games like bingo. They'll be what will they be?
Yeah, lots of things like bingo. Children love snakes and ladders, Ludo, all those kind of traditional board games. I will have a board posted up onto into my bit paper, and the first few lessons, first lesson or so, if the child is really acutely anxious at that point, we just play snakes and ladders, and and that it's a case of bringing down the level of difficulty of something to a point where it's enjoyable. And at that point they can start to succeed, they can start to enjoy it, they can enjoy winning, and that kind of feeling of I've got this kind of feeling. And to be honest, I don't have to play that level of only playing the game for very long, because that generally gets children on side. We've got big I can't reach them from now here, giant dice that I've made out of the 12-sided. And I get it so that they've got one at their end and they've made it up, and so then we can roll and we show the camera. I've got two, I'm going to move my elephant along too, and all this kind of thing. So they're just playing all the time, and that starts to bring down their anxiety, so that they can actually engage with me. And once they can start to engage with me, then their anxiety does start to come down, and then very gradually I start to increase. We go right back to basics. So children who come to me who are not managing to do the GCSE, they can't do the GCSE because many layers back down through the wall are gaps. And it's the thing I do a lot is trying to find the gaps. I find the gaps by all sorts of things that I do, but they're not really aware that that's what I'm doing. And very, very quickly within the first session, as I say, we might be playing Ludo, we might be doing whatever. Particularly snakes and ladders is one, because children love it. If you, oh no, I've got a 3. Oh no, I've got to go down the ladder. I've got to go down the snake. And you've kind of rolled it under the desk, so you don't show them. They don't need to know that. It's all psychological things, isn't it? And they will then, even a child who's been like massively anxious will laugh that I've gone down a snake and broken the ice. And it's all about breaking the ice and being able to start to sort of improve their confidence. Because if they've heard the word maths, they've been in a maths lesson, they will have just gone into this complete lockdown. And so, as I say, their memory and their processing speed, all that's just gone to pot. And they can't do things. And I hate timed tests. It's something I absolutely deplore, because it really messes with children. And if you ask them to do the same thing, not timed, they will manage to get masses more done and masses more right. The moment it becomes against the clock in any way, it sets off this fight or flight response, and then your brain diverts all the energy away from the processing speed and everything. So therefore they can't then can't do it. And it's just this massive vicious cycle, which is something that I try to sort out all the way through.
It's also this terrible habit that we have of teaching children to think quickly instead of deeply.
Absolutely.
We want, you said just before I pressed record, you said that you love to teach for understanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because it seems obvious, but it's actually not. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for example, you could try and teach a child times tables, but it's really only being a parrot and reciting in effect what is a poem. But will they have any understanding that 3 2s is the same as 2 3s? Let's have it in with counters. Well, now virtual counters. We've got them as arrays. We're moving things around. And if you've got 6 of them and now you put them into 3 lines, how many, how many are in each line, and all this kind of thing. And that's understanding. And without that, what will they recognize? They're trying to do some fractions. Will they recognize that certain numbers are both those denominators are both in a particular times table or whatever it might be? And without the understanding behind it, and it just being rote learning and parity, there's just no understanding. And so I think this is another reason why I really don't like time tests, but I also really don't like teaching for the test, because I see that when I'm teaching GCSE, I'm having to teach children who are still really quite weak. We've managed to fill in a lot of their gaps, but having to teach them kind of a method. If the question looks like this, you do dun, 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 dun.
It's procedure.
Absolutely. And it's procedural learning. And that doesn't help if the question doesn't look exactly like they're expecting it to do.
Right.
At the moment, it's not exactly how they've seen umpteen other ones. They have no ability to be able to break that question down and to work out what it is they're supposed to do. So, but sometimes if the children only come to you during their 5th form, and there's just a few months left to the exam, sadly, that's why when the only thing you can do is teach them procedures.
That's right. Right.
And I would much rather not do that. I'd much rather get them when they're 6 or 7, to be perfectly honest. So they go ahead through the rest of their into senior school without any problems, because we've backfilled all the issues, and they go forward as these confident, empowered little people. That's what I want, which is why I really want to teach more younger children, although the demand is this last minute. That there's 6 months left or 5 months left or whatever. We need a tutor now, and that with financial reasons. That's why people, that it was only literally when push comes to shove, right at that last minute, they'll go, okay, we're going to try and find the money to pay for tuition.
Okay, so let's nudge that further. So your specialism is dyscalculia,
yes,
which the way I talk about it in our special educational needs workshop is dyslexia for numbers.
Absolutely.
It's a sort of
that's the easiest way to describe it.
It is, isn't it? Because it's less known, the dyslexia, but it's sort of associated with the same kind of, I can't grasp the abstract concepts. So there's a few things with dyscalculia, isn't there? Number one is that you want to do things as hands-on as possible. So I want to, and you've given us some ideas about how to make online learning hands-on for dyscalculia. I'd love to hear more about that. And then the other thing is this idea of giving them the procedural technique. So I've seen a lot of children in year 6. So the Key Stage 2 SATs paper, you'll see the lowest achieving maths students always doing well in the 4-point procedural test. So, whether it's long division or long multiplication, there's a method, I can work through the method. And that seems to me like a quick win. So on the one hand, as a tutor, you want to teach for understanding and give them the opportunity to really think mathematically. But on the other hand, you do want to let them earn the points that will unlock the next step for them. So you want to give them the methods also, don't you?
Yeah. I think that's quite a difficult thing to weigh up between the two things. And I think that's possibly why convincing parents to get help for their child sooner rather than later is something that hopefully will eventually happen. And maybe with parents having to have had their children at home and seeing that the work that was coming home from, coming on the sort of the virtual learning, during the first lockdown, that their child was not able to do it. And, that may have sort of woken some parents up to realize actually, well, maybe we need to do something now. And I hope so, because I think for a child to go through all the way through to 16, having found maths really hard, really stressful, and having really high maths anxiety, it's just horrible for a child to have done that. And it's really, as a parent, I find it really heartbreaking to think that, there are children, because I meet them every day, who have felt like that. And
in every classroom.
Absolutely.
There are children like that in every classroom, and there's very little in an adult's life. There's, to have to sit through 55 minutes of torture every day is not something that adults have to put up with, but little people do. And if they suffer from maths anxiety, that's what it feels like to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I try really hard to bring down the maths anxiety. And the other thing I do is, I kind of brand myself as I'm a worksheet free zone. And that is the case apart from these very last minute GCSE people where they have to do past papers, but everybody else, I try and make it gamified. Now, if I was to say, here's a worksheet with 20 times table questions on it, most children would just go, we've got a snakes and ladders board, and then I've got some cards that I've made, virtual cards, in a pile, and we bring out the next one and it's got a question on it, and we do the question, and they do a question, I have my question, sometimes I answer my own question, sometimes I get them to answer my question, and then we roll the dice and we move on. And it's just it's a tolerable way of a child doing lots and lots of whatever it is you want them to practice, lots and lots of. And I do it with any kind of question you can possibly think of. I've linked it in this kind of way where getting to play the game is like a reward for having answered the question, but it's just fun. And sometimes we'll do one question, one roll of the dice. Other times it all depends on resilience. And that's my other big thing, is all about increasing their resilience to be able to cope with tricky situations. So
it's not just stamina for doing more maths. It's actually, I feel uncomfortable, I can't do it. What do I do next?
Yeah, and that's sort of just all about trying to sort of increase their resilience to be able to keep going. As I say, if they'd seen a huge list of questions, they would have had no resilience to be able to do that at all.
Yeah,
because it's drip fed through it, and a bit of enjoyment and a bit of laugh at Judy. She's just gone down a snake, and I've got lots of different boards.
You're the fall guy.
Yeah, and I'm like wah, 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 as I'm going down a snake, and they laugh, and we're all fine. And so I've got but I've got different boards. I've got some boards with masses of snakes on, and really big ladders that they can suddenly literally jump almost the whole way up, and so that brings in more sort of risk and enjoyment for them to and as I said, I've got all sorts of different ones, and it just depends on the child and where we're going as to which board I will have pasted into my bit paper. But being able to have all sorts of different questions. So sometimes I say I would get them to we'd do 3 or 4 or 5 questions, and then I'd say, oh, should we go back, should we roll again, and just go back to the board, and we'll roll again, and then we'll go back to do some more questions. And it's just a way of keeping them involved. And as I say, what do I get out of it? I get it that they've practiced lots of whatever it is I want them to practice.
Sure.
Because it's fun, their anxiety level automatically comes down.
Yeah.
And because their anxiety level comes down, then they're no longer particularly in that anxiety zone, in that growth zone, anxiety zone model. By I can't remember the name of the academic person. There's a whole book on it, I think.
Is it Carol Dweck?
That sounds
the growth mindset work.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah. And
I tell you, one of the things that you piqued my interest with your 12-sided dice. How do you get them to make a 12-sided dice?
you can just bear with me. I'll just try and reach it.
You have to have lots of things up your sleeve.
Yes.
Teach dyscalculia, don't you? Lots of stuff.
There we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's made on, on a piece of A4, so you print it off and then you cut it out on card, and they glue it together. So initially, the first time when they're really wobbly about things, I'll just have mine here, we'll roll it. And then I say, would you like me to send you one so you can make one up too?
Oh.
And they're like, yeah. And let me also just reach.
It's very cool for them to work on a net.
Yeah. So I've also got various other. Oh, that's green. That doesn't show. There we go.
Yeah. See that one? Yeah.
This isn't 1 to 6.
Yeah.
It's got numbers. What's the biggest one on that one? I think the biggest number is 8. So it's got but so it's then lots of probability of thing. And I said, do you want to use the yellow, the orange one, or the green one? The white one is just like the normal one.
Yeah.
So they can realize that actually, well, for example, with the green one, it's got a 0, so you might get nothing, and you might not move.
You might not move, but you also might not slip down the snake.
And it's like, do you want to take the risk to try and get an 8 or a 7 or a 6? But you might only get a 0 or
probabilities.
It's all probability, and you get them into actually deciding which dice they want to roll for their turn. As I say, it's bringing in probability. It's also just bringing in that idea of them making decisions.
Yeah.
Because I think they, particularly the children I meet, are so used to just being told what to do, and they can't think for themselves very easily. And and that's I've just realized one of the things that is like a big thing to me is choice. And I give my pupils so much choice. Well, they think they're getting choice. They're not necessarily but to them, for a child who it feels so out of their depth and so sort of, this huge mass anxiety, to actually feel vaguely in control of something.
Yes.
I think it makes a really significant difference to how a child thinks and feels about themselves. Yeah. So even for some of my older pupils, just before Christmas, I was doing this with a girl who's in year 9. And we were supposed to be factorising in algebra. And I wanted her to have lots and lots of practice. And I pasted from a textbook an exercise. And I said to her, okay, and I kind of drew a line part the way down. And I said, okay, I want you to choose to do 3 out of that first top section. You can choose any 3 of those questions. And it's really interesting because a child who's very cautious will just go, I'll go for number 1. And it's like, you could have chosen anyone on there and you go for number 1.
Well,
anyway.
But have they learned that the easy questions are at the beginning and the difficult questions are at the end?
There is. But then I'll say, well, what one do you want to do next? Number 2. I'll say, really, you can choose anyone. But then other ones get into it and go, my birthday's on the 17th. I'm going to do number 17. Yes, brilliant. Let's do number 17. And it's actually putting them, and like, one of the things I'll say a lot about is putting them in the driving seat. Well, they certainly feel like they're in the driving seat. So they're making a choice, and their ownership of their learning goes right up because they're making a choice. And then I'll say, okay, we'll let's do some out at the bottom section. How many do you think you want to try? And, she might say 2, she might say 10. I don't really mind what she says. And then I say, okay, which one do you want to do first? So it's just giving her choice. And I think at that point, she feels so much better. Just thinking about it, she felt so much better. I mean, I've done this a lot with her, but it was like the last lesson before Christmas. She feels so much better. She gets to completely choose what to do. And it's all about bringing the anxiety down because she feels in control. And it's
I think
really
also you're describing
empowering
environment. Empowering, that's right. Yeah. That's right. You're giving them agency.
Absolutely.
I think you're describing a maths learning environment that is so different to most classrooms. And
yes, I think it probably is. It's
I mean,
not different to my own classroom when I was teaching.
Well, that's really interesting, because I have an amazing, one of the teachers in my school that I unfortunately just left recently, she comes into every single lesson, and it is wonderful and creative, but to sustain it on such a big scale for a class of 30,
it's really hard.
It's not just that it's hard, it's also that there are losses as well as gains, because you're slowing the pace down. You've got to explain the game 29 times, and some girls are flying through it, and some children haven't quite caught up yet, and you've got all of that. But when you're working one-to-one with one student, and you have the maths conversation, and you're leading them through this game and making the game, bringing all the maths out of the game, that's a really, really rich learning environment.
And you're kind of eliciting everything out of it from them.
Yeah.
You're able to realise, actually, look, she's choosing not to do the ones that have got any negative numbers in. Okay, mental note of that one.
Mental note. Talk about elevators and thermometers.
Absolutely, it's this constant feedback of then knowing where you're going to try and make things go from then onwards. And no, you can't do that in a classroom with lots of children. You can't even do it, I don't think, in some kind of group tutoring situation. I mean, you can only do it with lots of experience and masses of tricks up your sleeve.
Yes.
And in a one-to-one situation.
And the other thing that you're describing is all the different roles that you're playing, because to a certain extent you're being the peer, aren't you? Because you're playing the game and falling down the ladder, falling down the snake, and that's sort of part of the fun. But then also you're the pathfinder, because you're seeing that negative numbers need to be addressed in the future sometime. I see negative numbers in your future. And then you're sort of planning all this entertainment to keep the energy up. So there's all these different hats that you're wearing at the same time, aren't there?
Yes, yeah, and I think that comes with confidence as a teacher and confidence as a tutor, and changing it from being a teacher to being. I mean, it's a really difficult thing about this thing, tutor, teacher, because I don't know whether it's just because I am a qualified teacher. I would say I'm teaching, because I am.
Yes,
I am teaching. I'm just teaching one person.
Yes.
And I think there is a difference between teaching and tutoring, because I'm definitely teaching content.
You're definitely teaching content, right?
Yeah, absolutely, all the time.
You're not entertaining.
No, I'm not just entertaining. And I'm also not just there to help them do a particular homework question. And I'm really quite upfront with parents that that's not my role. That's not that's not the service I provide. They are very welcome to go and find somebody else who wants to do that. But actually, I will be teaching. I will be moving through some kind of very, very personalised and constantly changing scheme of work for their child, with
very nice.
Having lots of content in there all the time. So that's the way I. That's the way I work and operate.
It's beautiful. So let's go further into that. So you're talking about schemes of work. One of the things that I have always found is lacking from tutoring is accountability. It's so difficult to not have somebody say, oh, that went well. Oh, that could have been better. All that feedback that you get in school that you don't get when you're working at home, and the parent doesn't really, you can give them the feedback and you can tell them what you covered today, but they don't understand it much more than the children, really, in terms of what the mechanics of the teaching and learning are. So how accountability into your structures?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I think it's quite hard to go from being feeling constantly criticised when you're in school teaching.
Right.
In certain schools, you're not praised or rewarded or made to feel good about anything that's gone well.
Right.
It's a constant, well, you didn't follow this, you didn't do that, you didn't do this, you did this, and it's taken me a long time to get away from feeling as if I've got somebody sat on my shoulder criticizing me the whole time. And it's really taken a long time to actually go, when I first tutored, I wrote huge lesson plans for everything, because I felt like somebody was going to come and check up on me.
Yeah.
So there is that side of it. But I think as time has gone on, I've become more confident and less imposter syndrome of the fact that, I know what I'm doing and I'm going to do it well. and I'm prepared to argue the toss with anyone over it, because I know what I'm doing is good, and I know what I'm doing gets results, and I know that it really changes how children feel, particularly about maths. The accountability thing is a tricky one, isn't it?
It's a tricky one because we need feedback. So I know that you're quite active on lots of tutoring Facebook groups.
Yes,
and
I am.
Communities, and you've now joined the QT community, and we're so happy to have you. I think that's one of the ways that we sort of build our own feedback loops, isn't it? Because we hear other people's questions, and we find answers, and we discover that, we knew the answer to that one. That's a nice feeling. I can be the giver in this situation, or I can ask my question.
Yeah, it does feels nice. I'm trying to go by the thing of like, give more than you get back. That sometimes within a particular week or something, it isn't necessarily the case, but generally, I don't know whether it's just because I'm a bit older than some of the other people in these groups. I feel just feel more able to answer questions, give a lot of support to people.
So nice.
And I think because I've been teaching longer and tutoring longer than a lot of people, you've got that sort of, I remember when that happened to me. This is what I did about it, or I did this and it didn't work. And I would, with hindsight, I would now do whatever. So able to sort of give lots of advice, and that's the difference between when I was first tutoring 11 years ago and this sort of last 18 months when I sort of came back out of the classroom for the final time, is that there is now this amazing, lots of Facebook and other forum sites to actually feel like you are not on your own. Whereas before, when I was tutoring, I'd left the classroom, I had no colleagues, I had no one to talk to, I had no one to share anything with, and it was incredibly lonely. Whereas this is just very well. It's so much nicer to be tutoring under these circumstances where they're for example, if something doesn't go particularly well in a lesson, you can either go onto one of the specialist Facebook groups, or things where people are particularly, for example, particularly teaching maths, or more general one, and just ask something, and people just come back with all this love and support. And from the point where you'd been feeling pretty rubbish about your ability to, on that day, to make a difference, you then feel so much better. So I think that anything with any of these groups and your site and everything, where if it's empowering tutors to be able to be the best tutor they can be, I think I can't see anything. I think is a brilliant idea. And then I think it's like having a massive staff room.
That's right.
You just go into the staff room and there's only a few people you talk to.
But you have to bring your own biscuits. That's the problem.
Yeah, you do. But like here, there could be thousands of people out there.
Especially being able to draw on specialists. So that was the last thing that I wanted to discuss with you tonight, if you've got time.
Yes.
Which is, talk to us about the course that you're doing, because it just sounds really interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, at the moment I'm doing a level 5 course in Dyscalculia, and I'm doing it through Steve Chin and Judy Hornigold. It's very unusual for me to meet somebody with the same name as me. I'm not used to it. Another Judy. They don't exist. And they're sort of real world experts on dyscalculia. They really know their stuff. They've, between them written, I don't know how many books, and their advisors at various different universities and everything. They really know their stuff, and they've started. They've got this sort of accredited course for teachers or tutors, or in my case, I'm both, to learn more about dyscalculia. Now, it's something that has been like my sort of specialism for quite a number of years. It's kind of where a lot of my children were, pupils were coming from. I specialise in teaching maths to children who find maths really hard. A lot of them are dyslexic, and in fact, quite a lot of them are actually dyscalculic as well. It's a really, really hard thing to get diagnosed for. And one of the reasons is that there's hardly anywhere where you can train to be an assessor. And there's currently only really 2 main places in the UK where you can train to become to be accredited to actually then being able to do the diagnosis.
So it's quite an underserved specialism, isn't it? It is,
massively so. I mean, they say that dyscalculia research is at least 20 years behind dyslexia research, which is why hardly anybody knows about it, and almost nobody on the ground in schools will know how to help children in the optimum way.
Yeah.
So
meanwhile, if we think about the reach of dyscalculia in terms of maths anxiety, mental health, and the functional skills of maths and how important those are, the fact that dyscalculia is so little understood is quite remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, it shouldn't be happening. It should be far more widely known about. And, I talked to a fellow tutor on one of the sites a couple of months ago, and she has recently early retired from being a head of a primary school. And I said, how many children in your school that went through your school have ever had a diagnosis of dyscalculia? And she sat there, we were on a Zoom call together, she sat there and she thought, and she went, not a single one. I said, how many people do you think had it? And she said, lots.
Yeah.
And that's the scary thing.
That's right.
A lot of the time, parents have to make a massive fuss to be able to get the dyslexia diagnosis, and a lot of the time they've had to find the money through their family and everything to be able to pay to have the diagnosis done, and then had to go back to the school and said, here we go. And it makes me makes my blood boil that there isn't the help for the children.
But Judy, as you're saying it, I'm thinking to myself, just earlier we were saying, how would a parent know to bring their child to a tutor for dyscalculia early at 7 or 8 years old? How would the parents know about dyslexia? Because as you just said, the research on dyslexia is 20 years ahead. It's not a term people know about, and therefore it's not a thing parents know to look for. And if the SENCO is not taking the lead on making that recommendation, then the child is just left at the back of the classroom.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's the SENCO's fault, because a lot of the time they are teaching almost full-time their own class. Depends, as well. And it's just this add-on bit, and your SENCO. And it's not an enviable job at all. Not
Absolutely
at all.
No.
Yeah, so how would a parent know? I would say one of the big flags is if they get into the juniors, and at that point it's really ramping up, and a lot of stuff to do with times tables, and especially with these new year 4 time tests coming in, and the child just can't learn. They can't learn the complicated ones like 7s and things, because actually they don't really know much more than the 10s.
And they don't know what they mean.
And all this kind of thing. So it's often that's the flashpoint where a parent will go, he can't learn his times table, and he's behind his year 2 or year 3 or 4 or something, and really behind. And it's at that point that it becomes obvious, because they at that point can't do the age expected things that they suddenly need to be able to do. So that's kind of a bit of a flag coming up. But then generally it's because all of the rest of the stuff underneath it hasn't really hit the mark. There's a lot of stuff to do with the subitizing, the recognizing of spots and things, and that's one of the tests that you can do.
So just to clarify, you mean on a die where you'll have 3 dots in a diagonal?
Dice. Yeah, it doesn't have to be on a dice. It can just be. So I've got some cards, got some subitizing cards behind me here.
Right. So I can see a row of 3 dots, and then underneath the 2 end dots, I can see 2 more dots. So it's a rectangular shape.
Yes.
So I know straight away that's a 3 and a 2. So I know it's a 5. And my 5-year-old would know that. Yeah.
I'm just trying to find some of the ones with fewer spots on. Here we go. So.
Yes. Okay. So we're seeing 4 dots in a square.
And especially this is like a standard, so I can't get my fingers in the right place, there we go, standard spot pattern. And if a child who's sort of 7 or 8 can't see that, and instantly, and that's the whole thing with the subtitling, instantly know that that's 4, that is a flag for dyscalculia.
Very nice.
Now, if you see something, there we go, we've got 3, the subtitling is your brain being able to recognize those things and knowing it straight away. And it's one of the skills that is like at the absolute beginning of maths learning. And if that doesn't come in and hasn't stuck, they probably will then be having issues later on. When you get to lots of spots, there's no way anyone's brain.
No, that looks like it's got the measles.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? Does look, there isn't any way of anyone knowing how many there are on there. And,
right.
The human brain can only really naturally subitize up to 5, but that you find that the children who have dyscalculia can't do that. Mm-hmm. That's one of the flags.
So when we talk about cognitive load theory, we talk about working memory and long-term memory. Which bit are they struggling with? I've always wondered this. Which bit do they struggle with? Quite the right question.
Yeah, I don't know.
You know what I mean? Because on the one hand, they can remember the procedure for long division.
Yes.
And they can work through it. So maybe it's not. Is it more about the abstract understanding of number?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's how the very early counting and sequencing and all that thing, which is really early years and nursery stuff. Yeah. And if that's not been done in enough of a manipulative and sort of concrete way,
hands-on,
got to be hands-on. And I think one of the issues is that schools have often stopped with any kind of manipulatives, in my opinion, way too early. And there's nothing wrong with there being coups and air rods and all that kind of thing even in a senior school classroom, and it being part of things, and all the kind of bar modelling and all that sort of Singapore stuff. All of that can make where it's all to do.
So when you say Singapore, you're talking about maths mastery.
Yes, sorry.
Singapore. When we talk about maths, about doing lots and lots of hands-on work with 100 beads and base 10 blocks, where children get a hands-on and then a visual representation of what number means, so that the concepts are more deeply embedded, and therefore they can manipulate the numbers with more confidence. So like you said, when the question looks different, that's fine, because they understand.
Absolutely. And I think with teaching with manipulatives. I mean, in my case, I have to teach with them virtual manipulatives, although there are certain things where I make sure they've got one at their end, a real one at their end as well.
Like what would you have them fetch beforehand?
They could have, I mean, for example, the dice, but they could have, a rec and rec.
Yeah.
They could have Cousineau rods. They could have the Dean's, the base 10 equipment.
So you'll just ask the parents to order a pack of that so that the children have one on their end. That's a good idea.
And so they can be playing it with their end, me, my end. We can hold things to the camera. I can also do it like virtually on the actual screen as well. With
which programs do you use on the computer for visual manipulatives?
I use MathSpot a lot. That's got it's got everything all the way up to sort of algebra tiles, and that's something that I've changed the way I teach algebra by using algebra tiles. It's visual.
That's interesting.
And children who couldn't do it suddenly going, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? I'm like, yes, it does.
I'm going to look that
visual, up. And the moment you got back to that pictorial and visuals way, even children, and I don't know, I feel that there's a thing about that children, that there is a sort of inbuilt issue with some children, and it's a neurodiversity thing of how they're wired up. That
neurodiversity.
They have this propensity to not be able to do the maths in the same way as an ideal child. I mean, what is normal? None of us are actually normal, are we? So there's that, and then if you add in the fact that when they were 5 or 6, they had to have grommets, and it turned out they hadn't actually been able to hear very well for a while.
Yes.
And you put in a child that I teach. She is dyslexic and she is dyscalculic, but she was also involved in a very bad accident, and she on and off has missed an awful lot of school from having to have
trauma there.
Yeah, more operations on her very damaged leg.
Wow.
So is she having problems because she's dyslexic and dyscalculic? Yes, she is. She also having issues because she has huge chunks of schooling that she missed. Yes.
Now, maths lends itself to maths anxiety and gaps because it's so linear, because our curriculum builds on itself term to term and year to year.
Yeah.
So if the child had a cold and missed a week or 2 of school or was isolating, then we get great big gaps in their knowledge, which make them feel like it's gobbledygook in the classroom when they get back.
Absolutely.
So that knocks their confidence. And so that would not be a child with dyscalculia, but it would be a child with maths anxiety.
Absolutely. So, I don't really kind of differentiate between a child who is, if they have maths anxiety, they have maths anxiety, and they may have it for a whole host of very complicated, convoluted reasons.
Yes.
But
they're circumstantial.
Yeah, absolutely. An awful lot to do with circumstances. So a lot of it is about bringing down the anxiety to get them to engage, and then we start to fill in the gaps.
One of the things I often notice in the classroom is sometimes it's that the teacher's not being clear, and the children how would they know? Yeah. How would they know that it's actually because the teacher is not explaining this clearly enough to them?
Well, this is one of my issues that I have found over my career and something. If I think back to the schools that I've taught in, each time I was the only confident mathematician on the staff.
Right.
Everybody else had come via doing English and psychology and stuff like that at A level. They might have done a B.Ed, because I was in primary, and there I was. I'd got an engineering degree, so completely different background. Obviously, I also had the primary B.Ed degree as well. But could be there, and no one other than myself, a lot of the time, was very confident to actually teach maths. And a lovely friend who I worked alongside with in parallel class, she had taken 5 attempts to pass her GCSE maths. And yet
she was teaching
maths. I mean, I have to say, she was amazing at English, and she was amazing drama and real, all the stuff that I don't naturally gravitate towards. And so we have very, very different skills. But at each time, she was in front of her class teaching them this maths. I was in front of my class, but I was confident in front of my class teaching them. And I knew where it was coming from. I knew where it was going to. And I think that's a real issue, that people don't tend to go in. I mean, there are other primary teachers, but a lot of the time they haven't, people who were the like myself, maths, physics, chemistry, STEM type of pupils ourselves, haven't gone into primary. I don't know whether you found that. Have you found that?
That's very interesting. No, I had a very maths weighted staff.
Yeah, I think it must depend on the school. I think I must have been unlucky or lucky, depending on point of view. Yeah. I mean, when I was head of maths at a prep school, and a lot of my stuff was really about trying to empower the rest of the teachers on the staff that that this is what they needed to teach, and this was why they needed to teach it like this. Yeah. That was it was quite hard. I had to sort of completely rewrite the whole curriculum and schemes of work and everything. And then try and empower them that they could teach it, that they could teach this, and they could.
What occurs to me when you're saying this is that we don't have this problem in tutoring, do we? We all tutor to our specialisms.
Yes.
And it's quite an interesting thing how, a student, we were just talking about this recently, that could it be that, when does a student need to move on to a different tutor? And if you think about the fact that every tutor does have their specialisms, you can see a student outgrowing the need for one tutor and moving into another. Yeah. But what also happens there is, because we're teaching our subject, we can anticipate the misconceptions or the gaps as they come up.
We know the subject well enough to know.
It's the pedagogical subject knowledge. It's not the PhD. It's the understanding of the nuts and bolts of your subject.
Yeah. And I think you tend to know that about your own subject, and that's the good thing about tutoring, is because you can niche down.
Yes.
I don't profess at all to be good at teaching for people to try and get from a 7 or 8 up to a 9 for GCSE. That's not where my level of expertise is. Not that I can't do the maths myself, obviously I can, but I know how to really help the children who are working at a lower level, because it doesn't all make sense, rather than giving the icing on the top of the cake. Yes. Now, there are lots of tutors who are really good at that. And that's their niche, is to be able to teach at that very top end and teach A level, and to particularly teach further maths A level. So I think we do all kind of tend to niche down a bit.
And that takes us back to that idea of this sort of giant staff room that we're beginning to work in, isn't it? That there's enough work for everyone, because we're all working in our specialism. And if we're creating this sort of bespoke model, we should stay within our specialism and point somebody to the other tutor they know who could do that thing better.
Yes, and that's the good thing about these Facebook groups, is that now you're actually kind of beginning to get to know who does what.
Yeah.
And so, if I was to get an inquiry for A level, I know people who teach that, and I would thank the parent very much for their inquiries, but say, I don't do that, but I can suggest. And then I could give them several names.
And how valuable to be able to do that for each other.
Because I think that certainly didn't happen when I was first tutoring, when it was incredibly lonely. And I didn't know anybody else who tutored in my area, let alone anyone who was a slightly different flavour of tutor to me, to be able to pass somebody else on. You just didn't know it. And I think that's the great thing about the online communities, is the fact that people do now know these things.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up here. I think that
I think we could talk forever, Julia, couldn't we?
We could. And I'm hoping that we're going to have another chance to do this. And I am going to invite you to do a workshop with us because
thank you.
You've got so much to share. So, Judy, we're really, really happy to have you in the Qualified Tutor community because it's all about this professional conversation that we're generating together and the supportiveness. And we all know that as much as it's lovely for us, it's our students that are benefiting.
Yeah.
Because the more that we're improving our practice by reflecting, reassuring, collaborating together, the more that our students are going to benefit. So thank you so very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
I look forward to the next time.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Speak soon.
Yeah, thanks then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Qualified Tutor Podcast, where tutors share their expertise to support the tutoring community. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes below. We exist to connect, share, and learn with you because tutoring is a small job that makes a big difference.